Hello and welcome to the Empowered Couples Podcast, where here you get modern, non-boring relationship advice for you and your partner to communicate like pros, fight smarter, and stay on the same team no matter the challenge that you face. I am one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman.
And I'm Jocelyn Freeman, but you all just know us as the Freemans.
And this episode is about better ways to respond instead of react when your partner says something that's hard to hear.
Yeah, and I'm sure you, when reading that, go, yes, my partner sometimes says things that I don't like hearing, and I could get better at responding rather than reacting. And this, was really kind of one of the main themes from yesterday's couples workshop. We had our in-person couples workshop in Arizona. It was amazing. Couples were so willing. And yes, there were real challenges, for many couples. I mean, the last year and a half has been especially hard on relationships. And
when you said willing, I think you meant willing to have the conversations that were the most important as a part of the exercises, specifically around communication.
And willing to go beyond where they were normally challenged. Like the takeaways of
that's true, yeah.
I realized I normally would have done this, but then this exercise helped me do this. And this is one of them, right? So many people kind of said in their shares, it's hard to not react when my partner says something that's hard to hear, or it's also hard to acknowledge their emotions when it's related to something I did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what we found, typically, there's a big difference between the experience a partner is having rather than the activities. So it's not usually hard to hear a partner share about a place that they have some dissatisfaction, or if we just get bold about it, that they're just upset about. And what we did in the workshop was really allow for the partner to express the emotional impact that's been. That's what's hard. Mm-hmm. Because that's not what we normally do. That's not what they normally do. You probably have heard, and if you're listening to this now, at one point you've heard your own partner share something that they don't like. Mm-hmm. They have some sort of complaint.
Or frustration,
sadness. Yeah, totally. And it's usually about the activity that happened. Mm-hmm. And then we typically react, hence why we're doing this podcast. Or at least, what I also saw, by the way, not a part of this podcast, but for many, they were men that I was happening to talk to. One guy was from the military and worked in the police. Another guy was a business owner. And both of their jobs was to, in critical situations, get to a solution that would be effective fast. Mm-hmm. And I really said to them both, I said, you're good at that, and that's great. And right now, that doesn't help you at all. Mm-hmm. And so when we say hard to hear, it would go from something like one partner was sharing, you didn't include me in the decision-making about a part of their business. I won't go further into it. And in that space, what she shared was, I can't rely on you and I don't trust you. And when that's the hard part to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for you, before we go further, just pause and ask yourself, when my partner says something that you perceive as hard to hear, do you unconsciously react or do you consciously respond? And we'll break down what those each mean. And, you have to really get that a thriving partnership is a space where both of you are safe to share, to open up, even things that are hard to hear. It is not about tiptoeing around each other, only having positives, only rainbows and butterflies. No, it's got to be a safe space for there to be times where your partner can open up and be like, I got to share this. I've been feeling this. And you validate them, right? That it's not going to go well if you two are always unconsciously reacting to each other. You start to think, wow, I really can't open up to this person, so I'm going to start to suppress more and more. We've talked about that on multiple podcasts about how if you start to build a pattern where you have to withhold communications, it is the fastest path to resentment. And resentment can be so much harder to repair from. Not impossible, but harder. So, Aaron, do you want to start to break down the difference between reacting and responding? And I'll chime in too.
Yeah, and I think you're going to get this. I think reacting and responding is pretty standard terminology now, but in the moment, it's like, how do I stop that, right? But so reacting, obviously, in unconscious action. It's immediate. You don't have to think about it. You've heard about amygdala hijacks. You've heard about when your brain perceives a threat, then you go right out of the logical mind and you just take a default action.
Exactly.
And in this case, action could be a words, could be not. It could actually be a non-action, meaning like you kind of just do nothing and you leave. But essentially, what's interesting about that is, though I said perceived threat, how interesting that the emotion coming from our partner now gets perceived by the brain as a threat, as if your own physical safety was on the line.
It's so true. It's like you're running from a bear, but it's just your partner. They're just expressing themselves, and you're like, I gotta run.
Yeah. In the workshop, we have a point where I talk about a bus coming. And no, there's times you don't want to have to think, and you want to just get out of the way of the bus, or in your case, the bear. Actually, are you supposed to run from a bear?
Certain bears, and I don't know which bear, but there's certain bears you're supposed to be still. And
either way, you're probably going to react by running, and then it might not go as well either. But essentially, reacting is this, sometimes we call it an emotional trigger, but like in our book, we say there's actually a triggering event. Then there's a triggered emotion. Then there's a triggered behavior. And that's what we're talking about. There's a triggered behavior, a way in which you unconsciously, by default, just react without thinking about it. And you think, well, then where does it come from? It's a pattern that you built up over time to try to avoid pain.
And you don't have to stay stuck in that pattern. You can shift and transform. So I wanted to add with reacting, I love the way you described that too. It's often coming from defensiveness, like you said, like a perceived threat, like you need to protect yourself from, and you said this really powerful yesterday, Aaron, about how it's really hard to be with sometimes the idea that your partner is disappointed and disappointed in you. And so we can unconsciously want to protect ourselves from feeling that emotion. So it could be defensiveness, and it also can be assumptions. So many people are not truly listening. So they hear their partner and they're really like, they don't really hear what their partner is saying. You're hearing your own interpretation of it.
I heard that a couple of times, actually.
Oh, yeah. And
they even started it that way. So how do they say it exactly? What I perceive. Even one guy went on to say, well, how you should have said it was this way.
Yeah, like correcting it instead.
And it's hard because it really does take a change in the pattern of how your brain is typically wired to actually listen. And it was just funny how fast I watched it, So we like get by the table by a couple, and they're doing this type of exercise, and you can just literally like almost watch them think about their own thoughts about what their partner is actually saying, and just make snap assumptions and judgments and interpretations is a better word constantly. And I kept on, for one couple, kept on saying, notice how you're not actually listening over there where she is. You kept on even using the word interpretation. So.
Yeah, well, that and interrupting was big. There was one of the cool things about the workshop, right, is we can walk around and interact. And we, sometimes we're just holding space and we listen. And other times we interrupt and go, hey, this is your normal pattern. This is what you normally do. And there was another couple I was interacting with where I could observe her normal way of listening was actually listening to a few words, then interrupting. Then he'd kind of try to jump in again, say a few more words, then she'd interrupt again. And that's, again, her unconscious reaction. And so I said, hey, pause right there. Notice this. And she really got it. She's like, almost like as if she didn't even know she was doing that. It was, and that's how reacting can be.
We're in the reacting category. Yeah, totally.
It can feel so almost, it's just automatic, like you said. So that is reacting, right? Not helpful. You're usually invalidating. You're making it about you. You're judging in some way. Not really that helpful to react. So Aaron, do you want to go in?
Not really helpful. It's not helpful at all. It actually does damage. You're not understanding. They feel invalidated. You end up saying something you didn't mean. You're not even really in the conversation, again, because you're in the conversation in your own mind. Reacting is never good.
Okay. So
again, unless the bus is coming. That's the
only time, or the bear,
scenario,
one of those.
So responding then, as you can imagine, is the shift from unconscious to conscious. So what we're going to cover today are ways you can move into consciously responding. And it is about moving in the direction of basically being able to truly listen, which is a segment in our book. And as we said in the workshop, truly listening is the only access to understanding your partner. And then you want to be able to choose your response, your words or your actions that are going to benefit the conversation, have your partner feel validated. And like we say, communication does two things. And that's it. It either, in a relationship that is, it separates you or connects you.
Exactly.
And responding is the only way to be on the path of having communication be connecting. Reacting is the path of separation.
And I love that you had said how it's about consciously choosing your next words or action, because when you are kind of training yourself to respond, and we're going to give you again some different ways to do that, some better ways to respond, but this is really something you are training yourself to do. It doesn't mean that inside you're just feeling great necessarily. You might be feeling some emotion because of what your partner is saying. Maybe you are even feeling triggered, maybe sad, mad, defensive, but it is possible to feel all those things and still choose your words.
I think this is great you said that, because sometimes in that conversation out there about responding, it doesn't really get talked about. You could still be feeling kind of bad.
Yeah.
You could be feeling judged, disrespected sometimes.
Mad at them too.
Yeah, and so I really love that you're saying this, because, an Instagram post or a social post is like about reacting and responding. All you gotta do is respond. But it doesn't really talk about all of the emotion that could still be happening within. But you're still able to, I'm kind of giving the first one away, pause to create a gap between the automatic action and then being able to choose what you can say and do next.
Yeah, so we might as well transition, but just to kind of wrap up the responding, right? It's about, I want this to be a constructive conversation. I want this to be a conversation where we're more connected. So I'm going to choose helpful words and actions here. So you have to set aside your ego that wants to defend itself, because we all have that part of ourselves that just likes to be right, wants to defend. Set that aside. Be like, I hear you. Okay, I'm not going to listen to you. A little bit, noise in my head. I'm going to choose better words right now and better responses. So let's go into that. Better ways to respond instead of react to your partner. And you had said the first point there, Erin, about slowing down. So you have to actually be aware in the moment of, okay, my partner's expressing something, and take a breath. I don't need to respond a millisecond after they close their mouth, and they might not even be done with the sentence, but I see a gap.
Well, I do want to say something about this, because what's funny, we've also said this to couples that we've coached. So I want to invite you, if you're listening, when you're taking this pause with the breath, don't have it be, if the right word is, exacerbated. No, well, that's an exhalation, but that breath is like... I've actually seen people do that.
Like, be over dramatic about it.
Well, they're creating a pause, but for the other partner, it's like, are you kidding me? It actually, funny enough, that breath can turn into a reaction, kind of.
Yes.
Because it just shows your absolute disapproval, especially if your eyes are closed while you're taking the breath. Imagine just...
You're right.
You're not listening, right? Yeah. The point of this is you take a breath so you can stay present with what they're saying, not take yourself out and show your absolute disgust in what they're saying.
Yeah, that is a great distinction there about taking that pause. So you're slowing down, you're taking a breath in a normal, way, not being dramatic about it or rude.
You can do it without the sound, and they don't have to hear it.
So that's the first piece, right? So you have to slow it down. So now we're going to get into some specific ways or like words of what you could say next. Okay, so the first one could be mirroring, which, Erin, do you want to describe what mirroring is for people?
Well, it's basically that you're just repeating back what you heard or are observing that they might be feeling. We'll just keep it at that. Chris Voss, lead FBI negotiator, in his amazing book about Never Split the Difference, talks about mirroring, how he uses it in negotiation. And it's just a way, number one, I don't know if he says this part, but it's a way to, have the other person go deeper. Like when you mirror, you basically say back the last couple of words that the person says. We're not having you actually parrot what your partner says, but if you were to try this out, it is actually pretty cool. If you just say the last couple of words back to your partner, people don't notice that you're repeating the last couple of words, and so they'll just continue on with their train of thought. So in negotiation tactic, it's powerful because Chris Voss and FBI negotiators can get deeper to what is the real issue here. But in this case, it actually helps your partner because they might not know why they are triggered or necessarily what the source of their upset really is. So it does allow them to go a little bit deeper. But I think in the case of this point, it allows you for yourself to get back to, okay, well, I kind of got triggered for a second. And then I went in my head and I paused. I took this breath. So I didn't hear what they said at all because you were in your own mind. So asking them to kind of repeat what they said allows you to refocus on the words.
And an alternate way for like mirroring could be like reflecting back what you're hearing. So it could be like, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is blank. Is that right? So you're not parroting them. You're not doing it in a mocking way. You're just really saying, what I'm hearing you say is this. And then they can clarify and say, yes, that's what I'm saying. Or no, you misheard it. Right. So that's one way. Or you could even go, hey, it seems like what you're feeling is blank. It seems like you're feeling frustrated. Is that true? It seems like you're feeling sad. Is that true? So and that's powerful because it truly does feel to your partner like they're seen. They feel safe. They feel like you're actually receiving them. And so that's a really powerful way to respond. Second one would be to ask a clarifying question, right? So because you don't want to be making assumptions. When you're reacting, you're a lot of times assuming. So if there's something that you think you could misinterpret, say, hey, would you mind elaborating on what you mean by blank? Because they could say one word and you make it mean a whole other thing when that's not what they intended. So that's a really powerful way to just get clarification on what they're trying to say.
I mean, an example might be your partner just says, I can't trust you. So you might say, okay, so what I'm hearing you say is that you don't feel trust in me right now. Is that right? Seems like you're feeling frustrated. Maybe you feel in the dark. Is that right? And then this third point is, would you mind elaborating on what you mean by trust? Right? So actually pretty simple series of events and series of ways to say this. And one thing I was thinking about, this might just be for me, but when I think about responding and reacting, there's a lot of stuff happening in my body and in my mind. And some of the things we talked about were about getting out of the mind, but there's still that emotion. So what I think this does by mirroring and asking for clarification or elaborating, it gets the other person talking more. So it almost feels like it gives me a break.
Yeah.
Like long enough to kind of gather myself, gather my emotions, get present again. And I think that's the biggest benefit as to why I really don't feel like I hardly ever react. Now, I don't always say maybe the best things, but I do feel like I'm choosing what I want to say in those moments. I don't feel like anytime we have an upset or a conflict, I don't think I react hardly ever. Again, there's still ways I could have chosen to say or do things differently, but I don't ever feel like I'm in that space. And part of it is because I'm really good at asking questions. I'm actually really good at deflecting. Like when we would go to personal development seminars and you are supposed to share with each other and then you switch, I would have the other person talk the whole time. So I'm good at questions, but it has given me this space to not react. And I think by having the other person talk more, take it a little bit deeper, kind of gives me that moment to get back present.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it. So another better way you can respond is to express appreciation. So you could actually say, hey, I really appreciate that you're opening up to me about this. So again, you still might be feeling defensive inside. You might be feeling mad inside, because it's normal to have a response of kind of like your own trigger coming up. But again, you can be triggered and still say something. So imagine your partner opens up, says something that's hard for you to hear, and you still say, hey, I really appreciate that you're opening up to me about this. Mm-hmm. Because you should appreciate that. Your partner, do you want them to suppress things? Hopefully not, right? Hopefully you do appreciate when they open up, and it's an opportunity to work on things. You can only work on something when you have awareness around it. And sometimes people are trying to ignore things and just kind of keep the peace. That doesn't work for a long-term thriving relationship.
The last piece here then too is to affirm that their current feeling, sometimes I use experience here, that their current experience is valid.
Yeah.
Is real. Mm-hmm. You know, this was another big thing that when you talk about reality, people get stuck there. That's not what happened. You're in another reality. You're not seeing it correctly. But that's only when you're talking about like logical sequence of events. That's not what I said. This is the order. No, that's wrong. Yeah, then of course you're going to have different perceptions of what was real. But if you can get down to that none of that matters, and you can affirm that their experience right now is real. It is real for them. You cannot deny that. In their body, in their mind, in your partner's experience right now are these experiences and emotions. You can't tell me that's not reality. So I know I'm getting hyped up too, because it's just powerful. When we argue about what's real and what's not real, you can't tell me that standing in front of your partner, you don't feel something real happening for them. Mm-hmm. So if you can just affirm that that is real for them and don't invalidate that like it's not the reality, you're going to be able to be in a much better place with your partner. And
some examples of how that could sound is, hey, I can totally imagine feeling frustrated if I was in your position. You know, or you know what? It's completely valid that you feel sad right now. Like, you know, there's many different ways you can say it.
I totally get how you would feel, and then however they're feeling.
Exactly. All right. One other better way to respond, and this one is helpful if you really know in that moment, maybe because of the topic, it is, you know, extra triggering for some reason, which by the way, we talk a lot about triggers in the Argument Hangover book. If you haven't read it, still recommend going to theargumenthangover.com to do that. But you may need to tell them that you need time to process it. And that could sound like, hey, I totally hear what you're saying, and I would like some time to reflect on this before I say anything. Can we come back to this tonight? Now, so there's some key things about this, right? So you're number one, telling them you hear them. You're then indicating that you'd like to reflect on it, not avoid. You are going to reflect on it. And then you are saying when you could come back to it. So it's not an indefinite, let's talk about it later. No, can we come back to it this evening, tomorrow morning, right? And that makes sure your partner doesn't feel like they're going to be left hanging. And then it's going to be just another conversation that doesn't come back and get readdressed.
Powerful.
So these are several different ways that you can respond better than reacting to your partner. And I know that some of you, in hearing about the couples workshop in person, maybe you have FOMO, or you're like, I wish we lived near them. You know, we have a lot of listeners all over, of course, US, Canada, but all over the world. And if you are looking for some support to overcome a challenge, something that you know the two of you just cannot kind of get beyond, it almost just feels like, how are we going to actually resolve this? Then do a session with us. Let's do a couple session. We call the first one a relationship breakthrough session. And that's where you get a sense of the type of results we produce in that first hour. And so you can actually go to meetthefreemans.com/coaching, read about that introductory session. And it's just a no-brainer. When you read the testimonials, it's going to make sense to you as to why you have to at least try that first session to see how it works. And people say that it works, for them, and this is coming from them, oftentimes so much better and faster than the months of counseling that they did, or just trying to figure it out on their own. So go and check out meetthefreemans.com/coaching. We'd love to do that session with you. But just kind of closing out this topic, right? There are going to be times in a partnership where you have something to say to each other that isn't the easiest to hear. It might be about you. It might be an area of dissatisfaction. It might be something that they are quote unquote upset with you about. But you want your relationship to be that safe place to land and to share with the intent to work through it together. It's not that, we just should be able to complain to each other all the time because we're both committed to being right and being annoyed with each other. No, it's, hey, we want to share these things with each other so that we can be better, so that we can have a breakthrough. And so that's what we're really inviting you into, and really hold yourself accountable to training yourself. It truly is, like you said at the beginning, Erin, it is changing up your patterns. Change your pattern from reacting to responding. And you may want to even re-listen to the specific ways that we said you could respond. So with that, everyone, we love connecting with you. We love getting the messages on Instagram, and we will talk to you on the next episode.